Alright, welcome everybody. Here we are with another video lesson for y'all. Those of you that weren't here when we covered this topic, make sure you watch this, make sure you get your notes down, and make sure you contact me about doing the exit ticket, because some of you are missing class and then not doing the exit ticket and those go into zeros. Don't do that. Make sure you contact me about those exit tickets. So we have the objective up here. We're going to explain how the growth of the Spanish Empire in North America shaped the development of these social and economic structures over time. You got your key terms here. I'm not going to go over them word for word, but know them there. Make sure you track them and keep them through that. And the big brain question of the day that I want you to think about as you are going through this. Spain was the first to institute slavery in the New World. Why do you think this system continues and advances throughout the years instead of going away? And when I say throughout the years, I'm talking, of course, about from the late 16th century all the way up through until, eventually English colonization and all that stuff. So think about that as we move through. Now, moving forward, if you need this, take the time right now, take a picture of it as we move on. Got a few seconds, and 3, 2, 1. Alright, moving on. Do now. This was mainly for if you were here live, so you don't really have to worry about writing things in the chat box. Make sure your note page is ready to go. Again, this is the ideal page. It is just a suggestion. It is up to you if you want to follow it or not. You can keep notes your own way as long as you have the objective and the notes. And make sure you're tracking key terms somewhere because they're going to come back later to haunt you. You're just ignoring them. Now, identify 2 items that went from the Americas to Europe, and then 2 more items that went from Europe to the Americas due to the Columbian Exchange. You don't have a chat box to do this in, but if you can do me a favor and think about it, make sure you remember them. We're going to come back to those later. Now, moving forward, we are talking today about the effects of the Spanish Empire. That is the incorrect date. Today is the 20th. I will fix that moving forward. Now, objective we already talked about, so we don't need much time. Again, effects of the Spanish Empire. Now let's move on to key point 1. In the economía system, Spanish colonial economies marshaled Native American labor to support plantation-based agriculture and extract precious metals and other resources. So in this system, the Spanish colonies are forcing, essentially, it's kind of what marshal means, forcing Native Americans to work on plantations or in mines to mine materials. Now, there are 2 labor systems in the Spanish Empire. There's the economía system, which uses the natives. It forces the natives to work. There is an inherent flaw in this system that we will talk about in a little bit. But then there is the asiento system. Wow, I said that super wrong. Sorry. Asiento system. A system where African slaves were carried to the Americas, and a tax was paid to Spain for each slave import. Alright? What is this system a precursor to? Well, we'll get into that a little later. See if you know it when we did it live, I had them in the chat box, see if anybody knew it. For now, if you have it in mind, think about it. We'll talk about it in a bit. Now, back to the encomienda system. So, this forced labor has a flaw, right? And that flaw is that Spanish conquerors, essentially, are getting natives sick, and the natives are dying. There's not enough natives to properly work all of these new things that they need work. So these conquerors end up being stuck with less than amounts of workers. So how do they fix that? How do they work around that? Well, they get African slaves to help them out. It's kind of messed up the way that works. Let's go on to key point 2. All right, European traders partnered with some West African groups who practiced slavery to forcibly extract slave labor for the Americas. The Spanish imported enslaved Africans to labor in plantation, agriculture, and mining. Plantations, I should say plantations. That is, again, the asiento system right here, right? African slaves being brought in. They were brought in to supplement this system because there weren't enough natives to properly work everything. Now, this system is a precursor to what? Well, it's a precursor to triangular trade, which we're going to talk about in a second. So look at the African slave trade during this time. Actually, this is a later map. But what you get is that all of these different trade routes from all along this coast, some are going to Europe, but very few. almost the vast majority are going to the Americas, South America, Central, and of course, North America. All right, this is the slave trade as it is, and then triangular trade comes a little bit later, especially like in the 1700s. But this is the precursor. That Spanish system, the Spaniards are the ones who kind of set the stage for triangular trade to take place in the New World. Without the Spaniards, you don't get triangular trade. They're the first ones to the party. Now, key point 3. The Spanish developed a caste system that incorporated and carefully defined the status of the diverse population of Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans in their empire. This is going to have big deal effects, but there is basically a royal caste structure. Peninsulars, Spaniards born in Spain, were at the very, very, very top. Then you had Creoles, Spaniards who were born in New Spain, right, in the colonies. They were below. Mestizos, which were part Spanish, part native, so basically like half native, half Spaniard. Then you had natives, and then at the very bottom you had enslaved people from Africa and the Caribbean. Now, a few things. Royal colonies. The Spanish set up a lot of colonies, specifically in the Indies. The Indies are what would be the Caribbean. Again, Columbus got lost, called them the Indies. It's the Caribbean. The Indies were under complete control of Spain. This was called the Council of Indies. In Spain, used a lot of viceroys, which are like royal rulers. People like the royals would pick somebody and say, hey, you go rule in the colonies, and that's what viceroys kind of did. Now, relations with the natives. Bad relations with the natives. The Spanish were not polite with the natives. Between Catholic missions and conversion attempts and enslaving and forcing them to work for labor, right? The Spaniards saw a lot of the natives as inferior, as not good enough. They weren't Catholic. They didn't have, the weapons and armor and societal norms that Spaniards deemed appropriate. So they were enslaved when they got the chance. There was a revolt in 1680, the Pueblo Revolt. Indigenous Pueblo tribes fought against their oppressors. It didn't go too great for the tribes, but it was still one worth noting. So just keep track of that Pueblo Revolt. Pueblo people against Spanish colonizers. So, key topic review. What we are doing for the rest of this class is talking about other topics we've already discussed. We're going to talk about them. We're going to do some graphic organizers on them. If you have a printer and you would like to print these, I uploaded the files to Google Classroom. And it is basically pictures of these graphic organizers blank, so you can use them. If you're using paper, that's okay. If you're using paper, just follow along with that. Most of these you can just make really briefly with paper. So now this first one is more of a question, and it's about native tribes, native societies before European contact. And basically it's just a question, something you have to remember when we talk about natives pre-European contact, and that's, why did tribes develop so differently? Here I have the Southwest region, and here I have the Great Plains region. Why do they develop so differently pre-European contact? Well, the answer is very simple, right? The answer is because native tribes developed based around where they lived. Depending on the region they lived in, depended on how they lived and what they did. So here I would put, and I'm going to fill this in for you guys so that you guys can kind of see it in action. Right? Native tribes pre-European contact develop societies based on the regions they live in. So there we go. So why? Because native tribes pre-European contact developed societies based on the geography of the regions they lived in. That is just a given fact of all of this. That is what happened. That's how it went to be. Now, I'm going to leave this up so you can pause and get it for a few seconds, all right? And then we're going to move on to the next organizer. All right, so causes of European explanation, right? There are 3: God, gold, glory, the 3 G's. You know those. God is social, gold is economic, glory is political. Remember that political always ties back to the nations competing with one another or trying to get stronger. That is a gap I noticed on the exit ticket a few days ago. So, what we are going to do is go through just a few, of these examples. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch. I'm going to type down 2 or 3, and if you find more, you should find more, find them. And move through. So, God, what do we have? Spanish missionaries is a great one. What else? Conversion of Native Americans. Religious freedom, which comes a little later on down the line. What about gold? What are some economic reasons, right? Literally gold. New goods like tobacco. What else could we put for gold? What else could we put for gold? Precious minerals, right? So metals and things like that. And of course land. Land is a big one because more land means more money. Back then especially more than now. So glory, right? Political favor for individual explorers. Meaning they could basically ask favors of the royal family. They could say, hey, king, queen, whoever you are in charge, why don't you help me out with this? Because, I went and explored all that stuff for you and colonized. Yeah, thanks. What else? Nations becoming stronger by gaining new territory. And then what's another one you could do? You could do nations competing for territory with one another. Those are all good, solid examples of glory. So, I spelled political wrong. That is not going to fly. There we go. I'm going to leave this pause for a few seconds. All right, remember, social reasons or God, Spanish missionaries, conversion of Native Americans, religious freedom. Economic reasons like gold, literally gold, new goods like tobacco, precious minerals / metals, and of course more land. And then political glory reasons, political favor for individual explorers, nations becoming stronger by gaining new territory, nations competing for territory with one another. Those are all causes of European exploration. Make sure you get them down in boxes similar to these or in the blank organizer that you printed. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, so I'll move this up for a few seconds. Alright, so if you used your printer, if you have one, if you have access to one, you printed out or should have printed out a graphic organizer that looks kind of like this one. If you do not want to use it or if you don't have a printer, it's not a big deal. We're going to use a different one here in class, but this one that you're using is more than okay. If you want to write these down and transfer them to this later after you get a printer or after you print them, go ahead and do that, but make sure you print them, or you should have printed them already because I had already given the insight. So make sure you get these down. If you're at home and you're watching the video later and you got a printer, just print it out, pause this, come back and fill this in later. We're going to use this one. And if you're writing this on paper, on your notebook, just make something like this, right? Put Europe on one side, America's on the other. Put 2 arrows from America to Europe, from Europe to America, and then just list a couple of items. And that's all we're going to do right now is list a couple of items. So let's just do that, right? So a few things. From America to Europe, what do you have that's new? Well, you have peppers. You have turkeys. Tobacco, which is going to be a big, big deal. Pumpkins. 3 sister crops, which are beans, corn, squash. Alright, so those are that's a good short list of really good, big, important, vital ones. What about from Europe to America? Well, we've got, let's actually, hold up. Livestock, and we're going to put cattle, which are cows, right? Horses, pigs. What else came from Europe to America? Well, you've got coffee beans, sugar cane. Let's not put bananas. Let's also make sure that we get the biggest, baddest thing that happened, and we're going to put it in all caps. Disease. Disease that killed lots and lots of natives. You have to remember that disease is a big deal and it devastated native populations in America. You have to remember that. So keep that in mind moving forward. This is what your Columbian Exchange graphic organizer should more or less look like moving forward. Now, we're going to go ahead and pause here, get this info down, and we're going to move on and I'm going to explain the exit ticket to you. So, if you're watching this and you're just a few minutes later, you just barely missed the class, there may still be time for you to check the exit ticket, so please do that on Google Classroom. basically you're going to use this map of triangle trait. Yes, this is triangle trait. And you're going to answer this practice SAQ. This is very similar to the other exit ticket formats. You're going to explain one development that contributed to this pattern. So you're going to tell me one thing that caused it. You're going to explain one effect that resulted from this pattern. So you're going to tell me one thing that it did. One thing that it made happen. And then you're going to explain another effect. So you're going to tell me another thing that happened as a result. So what are some things that happened as a result, and what's one thing that caused this? Alright, so again, if you were not in class and you do not have access to the Google Classroom because you didn't make it on time and the question shut down, you need to contact me on Teams or on email so I can send you this, or you can send me a way for you to answer it so you don't get a 0 for simply missing a class. Alright guys, that is it for me. I will see you guys in class later on. Have a good rest of your day.